Okay, let's get into another BH1 video editing tutorial. This time we're going to be talking about some of the visual effects that you'll be using in your video packages. I guess I'll go over some of the most common ones that students would like to know how to use, or we actually do use. Now, the thing about what we do, for the most part, we're doing journalism, so we don't tend to use a lot of effects. We're not trying to make our videos look flashy. This isn't supposed to be like your middle school PowerPoints where we use a fade or a blend between every single image. There's a particular time that's appropriate for using certain effects, but one that you're going to use quite a bit may be opening up from black and then fading to black at the beginning and end of your package. So let's go ahead and get rid of all the audio in this, just so we can minimize some of the noise. So remember, when I click on these videos, it's automatically highlighting the video and the audio track. I need to get that audio separate, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight everything. I'm going to unlink, and then I can then delete the audio. So I'm only dealing with the video now, because I don't want to have all the audio coming through trying to interrupt us. So alright, so this is your effects panel here. You can go to video effects, and there's all kinds of things in here. If you want to make something black and white, I believe that's an image control. Yeah, and you can also generate certain effects on the screen, like lightning and lights and things of that nature. So there's lightning. We have a lens flare, which is pretty cool. That'd be more like an artistic kind of thing. It adds that there to it, but obviously we're not going to be using that for our purposes. We do make short films and things for film festivals, so in those situations, we would use some more of the video effects, but what you're mostly going to be looking at through all this will be video transitions. And instead of just trying to go through all of this to find out what there is, I am going to give you a few that we use most commonly. So the first one would be a dip. Now, dip to black is what we're going to use most commonly. You can put that at the very beginning or at the very end of your packages, and all this does is it allows your package to fade in from black when it's at the beginning, and it fades out to black at the very end. So let's say that I have my marker at the very beginning of my sequence, and I press play, and that's how my sequence begins. But if I add a dip to black to the beginning, drag my marker over, it's a gradual fade in. So it kind of gives us a good distinction between when our anchors are talking and then transitioning over into your package piece as a reporter group or a talent group. So we will, this also allows, or it keeps there from being any sort of stark contrast between, we're watching the anchors and then all of a sudden, boom, we're in a video package. So having the dip to black assists us quite a bit in the flow of our production. Now, I can add it to the beginning so then it fades from black, and I can also add it to the very end so that it fades to black when it's over. There you go. So you'll be using dip to black at the very beginning, at the very end. This seems to work well with what we do. The other effect that students like to use quite a bit, but it does need to be used very sparingly, is called cross dissolve. Now, this is what most students would call a fade between two. This is very similar to the audio effects that we looked at in the previous video, in that it requires there to be, you can't use it at the very end of a video connecting to the very beginning of another video clip. You have to trim some of it back. So let's trim some of these back a little bit. I'm going to ripple delete to get those close to one another. I drag a cross dissolve in. See, it can go at the end of one, at the beginning of one, but it can also go between. But in order for it to go between, it has to have a little bit of excess that has been trimmed off. So we're going to add that cross dissolve. This is what it does. It just blends those two together. Again, this is more for when we do short films, not necessarily for our journalism pieces, because you're not going to see a cross dissolve in journalism. Cross dissolve normally will signify like a passage of time when you're trying to storytell through film. So we're not necessarily storytelling, we're reporting on facts for our journalism segments, but that is an effect that you would probably be interested in using. There are some other effects in here as well, some slides where one video pushes another one out of, but again, we're not using that for journalism. There are some others we can use. This is called texturize, but it's very bizarre. So again, the only transitions that you should be using for journalism should be using B-roll with your voiceovers, right? We're not using actual visual transition effects through that. But once you start getting into your short films or maybe things for the film festival, you can look into some more of these creative video effects. Now, in working with journalism, we may have some instances where we want to blur some things on camera. Maybe we didn't blur it necessarily with our focus, but whenever we go back in editing, we want to make sure that something is possibly blurred out. We just want to show the general idea of what's going on. We can add a blur and sharpen. Now there's a camera blur. This is the one that you would be using the most. So we drag that down onto it, and now our image is blurred. Now the reason why this would come into play would be maybe we could start the video in focus and then it gradually fades into a blur, and then we would pop some text up on the screen like some statistics or something of that nature. And when we do that, by blurring the background, it allows our audience to focus on the statistic we're bringing forth or the text we're bringing forward onto in the frame as opposed to the background. If the background were not blurred out, then they're distracted by what's going on back here because they can still make out little details like, oh, look at his bracelet, or I think I recognize that card, trying to read that text there, wonder what this guy's doing with his hands, all the stuff that we're focused on in the background instead of the text that we want the audience to focus on. So when we add that blur to it, well, they can't tell any of that. They have an idea of what's going on in the background, but they're not able to make out any minute details, so they're able to focus a little bit more on what we're trying to show them. Okay, double check real quick if there are any other effects. We can make video look old by adding dust and scratches to it. Noise and grain is another thing. So you don't really see it here, but if we were to crank up the effects here and then play the video, it would look a little different. You would see it slowing down a little bit, and that's because there's it just adds some kind of antiques the video a little bit. So again, there are some neat kind of things you can do in here. Don't go crazy on it though. If you had some extra time, it would be it's fun to kind of go in here and experiment. You can turn it to a mosaic, so this kind of finds the edges, and it will then, let's see, we're trying to see, it's kind of like pixelating everything. So again, it's just different, just little things that you wouldn't really necessarily think of incorporating into your video, but they're there. So just play around with it, and you're not going to hurt anything by applying them to your videos. Now we want to make sure we don't ship these videos out with these effects on it, but at least become familiar with them, ones that you like, and then keep those in mind for when you start on your film festival submissions.